You ever stand in the meat section staring at a package of chicken breast that costs $6.49 and think, please don't let this one turn into shoe leather again? I have, hundreds of times. And here's the thing nobody at that store is going to tell you. That $6 chicken breast and a $2 chicken breast turn out exactly the same in your pan, dry, stringy, sad. Unless you know what my grandmother knew. She fed 12 people off one chicken in a garden, and not one person at her table ever pushed a plate away because the meat was tough. Not once. There's a reason for that, and it isn't the price tag. It's a 15-minute trick she did before the chicken ever touched a pan, and almost nobody does it anymore. Stick with me because by the end of this, you're going to look at that same cheap chicken breast a whole new way. Now let me take you somewhere else for a second. Picture a farmhouse kitchen, early morning, wood stove already going because the coffee needs it. There's a glass jar of soured milk sitting on the counter, not because it went bad, but because somebody left it out on purpose. That's the whole secret sitting right there in that jar, and we're going to get into exactly why it works. Here's what people believe right now, today, all over the internet. A video with millions of views claims that if you just don't overcook chicken, it won't be dry. Set a timer. Use a meat thermometer. Pull it at exactly 165 degrees. And look, that's not wrong. That part is true. A thermometer really does help. But it's only half the story, and the half people are missing is the reason so many of us still end up with dry chicken even when we follow the timer perfectly. So let me ask you something. Have you ever done everything right? Thermometer, timer, the whole thing, and the chicken still came out chewy anyway? I'll be honest with you, because that trend isn't wrong. It's just incomplete. A meat thermometer is a genuinely good tool. I use one myself. But a thermometer only tells you when to stop cooking. It doesn't do anything to change what's happening inside that piece of meat before it ever hits the heat, and that's the piece almost every cooking video skips completely. My name's not important today. What matters is where I learned this. I live on a small farm, the kind with a hand pump out back and chickens that actually lay the eggs we eat. Everything I cook, I learned the old way, from people who didn't have a choice but to get it right, because wasting food wasn't something anyone could afford to do. The person who taught me this exact trick was my grandmother, and she was 11 years old when she learned it from her own mother, standing on a wooden stool so she could reach the counter. 11 years old, and she already knew something most adults today don't. That's not because she was special. It's because back then, if the chicken came out dry, that was supper ruined, and nobody had money to just order a pizza instead. You learned the trick, or you ate tough chicken and no one said a word about it because that's just how it was. By the end of this video, you're going to know exactly why chicken dries out in the first place. Not just don't overcook it, but the real reason, in plain language, anyone can understand. You're going to know the exact soak my grandmother used, how long, how warm, and what it actually does to the meat. And you're going to know how to tell, just by touch, when that chicken is ready to cook. No thermometer required, though you can still use one if you like. Before we get into the method, I do want to mention, if you like learning the reasoning behind these old techniques and not just the steps, I've put together a little written guide with more of my grandmother's kitchen notes, and you can find a link for that down in the description whenever you get a free minute. All right, let's talk about why chicken goes dry, because once you understand this, you'll never look at a chicken breast the same way again. Chicken meat is made of tiny bundles of muscle fiber, packed together like a bundle of drinking straws. Each one of those fibers is full of water, and that water is what makes the meat juicy. Now here's the part that matters. When you apply heat, those fibers do something called denaturation. Don't worry about that word. Here's what it actually means in plain kitchen talk. Heat makes the proteins in the meat curl up and squeeze tighter, kind of like wringing out a wet towel. The tighter they squeeze, the more water gets pushed out. That's it. That's the whole mystery. Dry chicken isn't chicken that lost its juice by accident. It's chicken that got wrung out like a towel because the heat made those fibers clench up too hard, too fast. Now here's where the buttermilk soak comes in, and this is the part almost nobody explains. Buttermilk, or any soured milk, is slightly acidic, That just means it has a mild sourness to it, the same kind of sourness you taste in a lemon, just gentler. That mild acid does two things to the chicken while it sits in that jar. First, it slightly loosens the tight weave of those muscle fibers so they don't clench as hard or as fast once they hit the heat. Second, salt in the soak. And yes, there needs to be real salt in there, not just buttermilk on its own. That salt actually gets pulled inside the meat itself, not just sitting on the surface. Once that salt is inside the fibers, it helps them hold on to water even while they're cooking, so you're not just seasoning the outside, you're changing how the meat behaves from the inside out before it ever sees a pan. That's the real trick, not the timer, not the thermometer, even though those help too. It's what happens to the meat in the hour or two before you ever turn on the stove. Let me walk you through exactly how my grandmother did it, step by step, and I still do it this same way today. Step 1. Take your chicken, breasts, thighs, whatever you've got, this works on all of it, and pat it dry with a paper towel first. That matters more than people think, because a wet surface won't let the salt and buttermilk soak in evenly. Step 2. In a bowl or a jar, mix 1 cup of buttermilk with 1 full tablespoon of salt for every pound of chicken you're soaking. If you don't have buttermilk, you can make your own in about 5 minutes. Just add 1 tablespoon of white vinegar or lemon juice to a cup of regular milk. Stir it and let it sit on the counter for 5 minutes until it thickens up a little and smells slightly sour. That sour smell is exactly what you want. It means the acid is working. Step 3. Submerge the chicken completely in that mixture. Every piece needs to be touching liquid, not just sitting on top. If you're using a bowl, you may need to press the chicken down with a small plate to keep it under. Step 4. Cover it and let it sit. Here's the timing that matters most. 30 minutes is the bare minimum, and you'll feel a difference even at 30 minutes. But 2 hours is the sweet spot. Any longer than about 4 hours, and the texture can start to get a little too soft, almost mushy, so don't leave it overnight thinking more is better. 2 hours, in a cold spot, the refrigerator if it's warm out, or a cool cellar or spring house if you've got one like my grandmother did. Step 5, and this is the part you can actually feel with your own hands. Before it goes in that soak, raw chicken feels a little firm, almost springy when you press it. After a good 2-hour soak, press it again gently with 2 fingers. It should feel noticeably softer, almost like the give you feel pressing on the fleshy part of your palm below your thumb. That softness you feel is the proof the acid did its job. That's your wrist test, the same kind of hands-on check my grandmother used instead of any gadget. Step 6. Pull the chicken out of the soak and pat it dry again gently with a paper towel. This part surprises people, but you actually want the surface dry before it hits the heat, because a dry surface browns better and gives you that golden color instead of steaming and turning gray. Step 7. Now for the cooking itself, and this is where the low and slow part comes in, because that soak only gets you halfway there. If your oven runs hot and fast, you can still wring all that moisture right back out no matter how good your soak was. Preheat your oven to 325 degrees. That's a gentle, steady heat, not much hotter than a warm summer afternoon in the shade. Bake the chicken until it reaches an internal temperature of 165 degrees, which usually takes about 25 to 35 minutes depending on thickness. But always check with a thermometer if you have one, right in the thickest part of the meat. Step 8. And please don't skip this one, because this is where most people undo all their hard work. Once it comes out of the oven, let the chicken rest on the counter for a full 5 minutes before you cut into it. Here's why that matters in plain terms. While the meat was cooking, all that juice got pushed toward the center, away from the heat. If you cut it open right away, that juice runs straight out onto your cutting board instead of staying in the meat. 5 minutes of resting gives those fibers time to relax just slightly and pull some of that liquid back in evenly throughout the whole piece. 5 minutes. Set a timer if you have to. It's the cheapest trick in this whole video, and it's the one people skip the most. Now let's talk money, because that's where this whole thing started, standing in that grocery store aisle. A pound of buttermilk costs about $2 at most stores, sometimes less, and 1 pound will season about 4 pounds of chicken with plenty left over for a second batch. Compare that to what a lot of folks do instead, buying pre-marinated chicken at the store, which typically runs $2 to $3 more per pound than plain chicken, for a marinade that's mostly just salt water and thickener anyway. If your family eats chicken twice a week, making your own buttermilk soak instead of buying pre-marinated packages can save you close to $20 a month, and that's being conservative. Over a year, that's close to $240, just from a 15-minute step you do yourself with 2 ingredients you probably already have in the kitchen. So let's bring this all together. Dry chicken isn't about bad luck, and it isn't only about a timer. It's about what happens to those muscle fibers, both before the heat and after it. A short soak in salted buttermilk loosens those fibers and lets salt get down inside them, so they hold on to water instead of squeezing it all out. Cooking low and slow instead of hot and fast keeps that squeezing gentle instead of sudden. And resting the meat for 5 minutes afterward lets that juice settle back through the whole piece instead of spilling out onto your cutting board. 3 simple habits. None of them cost you anything extra beyond a little bit of time and a cup of buttermilk. Here's your action step for this week. Before you make chicken for Sunday supper, stop by the store and pick up a small carton of buttermilk. It's usually sitting right by the regular milk, and it's one of the cheapest things in that whole dairy case. Do the 2-hour soak I just walked you through, cook it low and slow, and give it that 5-minute rest before you cut in. I think you're going to notice the difference on the very first bite, and so will whoever you're feeding. Now I want to ask you something, and I really do read every single comment. When you press that chicken after the soak and you feel that softness change under your fingers, what did it remind you of? I'm curious whether people describe that texture the same way I do, or if you've got your own way of describing it passed down in your own family. Tell me down below. Next time, I want to show you the same trick, but for a whole chicken instead of just pieces, plus one more old trick my grandmother used with the bones afterward that most people throw straight in the trash. But for tonight, just remember this: it was never really about the timer. It was about what you do to that chicken in the hour before it ever meets the heat.